And sometimes things that Jesus said, when we talk about Jesus, we think he always said nice things. And he said, things that made people feel all warm and fluffy and comfortable. But sometimes Jesus said some really shocking things. Can you look shocked for me? Oh, that's very good. Very good, okay. And one day he was teaching a really big crowd on a hillside. And he told them that not everyone who calls me Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven. Which I think would have made all the people listening on that hillside have really big questions. Because Jesus went on to say that even some people will argue that they performed miracles in my name. And he will say that he never knew them. So I reckon the people on that hillside, they would have had big questions. They would have said, we have big questions. Can you say, we have big questions? And they probably turn to each other and say, what did Jesus mean? Can you turn to someone and say, what did Jesus mean? And they might have thought about it a bit more, and they might have asked each other another question. What does calling Jesus Lord mean? Can you ask each other that? Now, Jesus, I love him. He is so and was so incredibly perceptive. I love the way he so often answered questions that people were thinking but were afraid to ask. And he often answers by telling a very simple story. But we have to be warned. Don't be fooled by the simplicity of the story, because we call his stories parables. They're more than a story. They're a way of learning something very important. So Jesus was looking at this crowd of people with all these big questions suddenly in their minds, and he tells them a story. He says, there was once a man. I'd like you to sort of do sort of actions with me as we go through this. He says there's once a man who looked around. Can we look around, please? He was looking around for somewhere to build his house. And he saw lots of flat land near the sea, but he saw a really, really big flat rock. And he said, that's it, this is where I will build my house. Can you go, that's it, this is where I will build my house. Now, it actually took him a lot of time, because he had to heave up an awful lot of stones onto that rock to build his walls, and he had to mix an awful lot of cement to make sure that it stuck to the rock. And he might even have dug some holes in the rock to make sure that when he put his posts in, they stayed there to make it even more secure. So after a while, he was sweating a lot. And I reckon that he moaned a bit. Can you do some moaning? I knew you'd be good at that. I knew you'd be good at that. And he groaned. A bit of groaning. And he began to say, is it ever worth it? Can you say that for me? Is it ever worth it? But eventually the house was finished. In fact, the cement had barely begun to dry when he was standing outside feeling really chuffed with himself. Can you look really chuffed with yourself? It's a little bit too good for some people out there. When he felt something. Can you go splash for me? It was a raindrop. And soon, there wasn't just a drop of rain. It was an absolute downpour. Can you do that for me? Downpour of rain. And it kept raining and raining. And he went inside. And as he was in his house, there was actually a flash flood. Can you do that for me? A flash flood outside. But he sat in his nice, warm house, and he said to himself, I'm really glad I made the effort. Can you say that for me? I'm really glad I've made the effort. It's really been worth it. And he lit a fire, and he put his kettle on, and he made himself a nice cup of tea. But there was another man. Jesus said that this man was also looking for a place to build a house. And this man, he saw all the rocky places and he said, oh, that looks like hard work. Can you do that for me? That looks like hard work. And he saw, when he thought about it, how easily his feet could move the sandy soil he was standing on. And he said, I know, I'll build it here on this nice sandy soil. Can you say, I know, I'll build it here on this nice sandy soil? And he ordered a big parcel of a flat-pack wooden house that he could put up really, really quickly. And he pushed all the posts into the sandy soil. I'm loving the action. She's not even having to be asked, is our Rachel? She's there already. Into the sandy soil. And he said, what a doddle. Can you say, what a doddle? What a doddle. And before long, he was standing in the sunshine, painting the finishing touches to his bright new front door. And then he stood back and also looked very chuffed of himself. And he smiled. But then suddenly, he felt something. I need another splash. It was a splash of rain. But he smiled and he simply opened his brand new front door and went inside into his nice warm house. And he went in and he lit his fire, but as he did so, he was sure that something odd happened. He said, that's odd. Can you say that for me? That's odd. Because that felt like rain. But he was inside. But the drips kept dripping and the rain kept falling, and pretty soon all the nice sandy soil had become very wet and muddy. And all his posts started to wobble. Can you do some wobbling for me? And they wobbled some more. We've got sound effects as well over here. It's amazing. And in the end, they wobbled too much and got washed away. And he put his hands in the air and he said, oh no! My house has fallen down! And all the crowds listening to Jesus, they laughed. Can you laugh? Because it was such a silly story. And he was such a silly man. And they said to each other, how silly? Can you say to each other, how silly? Who would build a house like that? But then they realized that Jesus had not finished. And everyone on that hillside, I reckon, went really, really quiet. And Jesus said, everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't put them into practice is exactly like the man who builds his house on sandy soil. See, anyone can walk around saying Jesus is Lord. And Jesus seems to suggest that people can even prophesy or even do a miracle in his name, which all strike me as very upfront stuff that other people can see. But you see, God doesn't just look at the outside, the outward appearance like we do. He looks at the heart. He sees stuff that other people don't see. What Jesus was asking is, does the way you live your life when no one else is looking say, I am Lord? I'm always struck by one of his other great parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the priest and the religious person, they walk by the man left for dead. They walk by. And no one is watching, you see. No one at the temple can see them walk past. But Jesus commends the Samaritan who actually stopped and helped. And he told his listeners, go and do likewise. E.g., when no one else is looking, when you could actually get away with it. Read the Gospels and you find Jesus telling people to do all sorts of things. Forgive enemies, not to worry. Make disciples, to remain in him, to abide in him. Following Jesus is not just about saying the word Lord. It's about living a life that says Jesus is Lord. Amen.